I'm Julia Touza. With Lee, James, and María-Luisa, I'm presenting some work on understanding the spatial and temporal dimensions of wildfire risk. These slides simply try to capture how the forest natural and social pressures, such as urban expansion, climate change, or unsustainable land uses, is increasing the frequency of catastrophic wildfire outbreaks. We all remember 2007, where Chile suffered the biggest wildfire episode in history, and in Portugal there were more than 100 fatalities. And yet, in 2019, the fire season in California was turned the worst on record. And yet, in 2020, we are also talking about the worst on record also in California as well. This increasing catastrophic nature of wildfires makes disaster risk management approach increasingly needed. And in this disaster risk management literature, it is well known that responding after a catastrophic event, or when this takes place, can lead to a slow response. Unplanned post-activity response are usually fragmented, poorly coordinated, and relied on budget reallocations. However, the development of a preventing approach can lead to well-prepared contingency plans that can decrease that uncertainty and fragmentation. The multiple actors involved in the catastrophe have clearly and previously set some responsibility on what they should be done. With that literature in mind, we do a case study on Galicia, a Spanish region with the highest proportion of wildfires in Spain. We examine a period of 11 years and use local scale data. In particular, we use fire counts at the municipal level. And what we are interested in is modeling the spatial and temporal change in wildfire risk. And for that, we use a Bayesian approach. So in an initial exploratory analysis, we can see in the dark blue line the temporal evolution of wildfire risk in the region overall. But what the figure tries to capture mainly is the contrasting difference between that temporal trend between the different localities. In that initial exploratory analysis, we also have done some global moral index calculations and see the spatial cluttering in the data. So therefore, we conclude that neighboring areas are likely to experience similar levels of fire rate. But then we question whether this is true also on looking at the temporal patterns. Do neighboring municipalities share similar temporal patterns? For that, we did analysis, a Poisson analysis in your right side, and do a moral index on the coefficient to get this contrasting evidence that no, increasing localities with increasing temporal trends are not necessarily clustered together. This is further illustrated in the graphs here, where we see, the spatial temporal complexity. The green line represents the overall regional trend, and we can see that these three municipalities follow very distinct patterns. So what our work is trying to distinguish is between the spatial and temporal hot and cold spots. So we will have a purely hot spot if it has higher overall risk than the regional trend, but we'll have a temporal pattern that is similar to the regional one. Likewise, we will have a purely spatial cold spot if this municipality has a lower overall risk than the region, but resemble the temporal trend in the region. Those areas that we are particularly interested in is areas that have a higher risk than in the region. That means that they are hot spots, but they also have a different temporal pattern, and that temporal pattern is increasing faster than the overall regional pattern. Okay, other areas that we are also particularly interested in is areas that they might have lower or follow the same type of risk that in the region, but they have an increasing temporal trend. Wildfire occurrence is increasing and in these areas, and this is represented by in the table by the areas in red. Participation parameter. So as I said, our results allow us to particularly locate those hot spots to identify 25 municipalities that have an increasing the risk. So they have already increasing risk that the regional risk, but this risk is not only higher, but it's still increasing. So these are the dark colors on the first figure on your left. But we also identified cold spots, municipalities with overall a lower wildfire occurrence rate than the regional one, but where the risk is increasing. And we identified 20 of these cold spots. And those municipalities that more or less have the same overall risk that the regional one, and again, these have increasing risk. So these 27 and 7 municipalities identified on the second and the third figure are the ones that we need to keep look at because they might become hotspots. I apologize that the names on the table might not be clear, but it indicate the number and the name of the municipalities in the different categories. Our analysis, as I said, we also look at the potential effect of the wildland-urban interface on the spatial temporal pattern, and we are able to conclude that a 10% increase in the wildland-urban interface could result in an increase of 10 fires per square meter in the different municipalities. So finally, as a conclusion, so we identify over 11 time period long-term hotspots, where there is a persistent problem, and in particular identify those hotspots that is still facing some increasing temporal trend, and therefore they need increased surveillance. But that increased surveillance is also needed in those areas whether the wildfire risk is low or medium, but it is still facing some increasing temporal trend, and therefore they are in danger of becoming hotspots. So finally, we try to support and provide information to take a more proactive approach and doing an exhaustive analysis of the wildfire data that can really inform decision making.